Let me welcome you all to the PIDE webinar. Hear me? We are ready to go. Today, we'll take up a topic that's close to everybody's heart. So let's look at it. The whole world is talking about the digital economy. We are all talking about the digital economy. We are all living in a digital world. So let me tell you that we are going to talk about the digital economy today. And the digital economy is, and as well as financial empowerment. So let's see what our experts have to say about the digital economy. I'm told the digital promise is a big promise for Pakistan. We are going to make a digital economy from our country. I've been told that for the last 30 years that we'll have 500 billion, 200 billion, God knows how many billion of exports. I'm still waiting. I'm not getting younger. So I hope it'll happen in my lifetime. But the promise is there. We all hear of startups. We all hear that good things are going to happen. But yet, I can't transfer money from my bank account to Jazz. Yet, I can't open an online account. Yet, I try to get a credit card online, I can't get it. So I don't know where the promise of digital is. Yet when I move a file in the secretariat, they tell me there is an whatever platform there. Then we go through the platform, about 5 levels. Then I'm told that the paper file has to move. So I don't know what the promise of the digital economy is. But let me say this webinar has been organized by Maliha Bangash. So I have to give a big warm clap to Maliha Bangash and see what she has to say. And I'll ask her to initiate the questioning and the panel discussion. So Maliha Bangash, I hope you are there to take over very soon. But let me introduce the panel. We have Mr. Azaz Hussain, the CEO of Systems Limited, a very, one of the largest firms, I guess, of digital or technology or computers, which has been around for a long time and which has lives in New York as well as Pakistan and is listed in the stock exchange. Then we have Mr. Suhir Khalik, a well-known technology person who has been the CEO of Mobilink, and who is now engaged in startups and incubating, has been in London as a major telecom consultant and an operator. So he knows his business very well. Then we have Mr. Farid Khan, who's the CEO of Finca, which is an important financial technology company. So I welcome all of you, and I hope that you will enlighten us, give us a very good overview of what the digital economy is all about. But I must introduce Maliha Bangash, who is a major senior fellow at PIDE and a major collaborator with us, and herself been in the Competition Commission in many places. And Maliha was kind enough to help us arrange this panel. So Maliha, will you come over and kick off the panel, please?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining. Special thanks for our esteemed speakers who we're going to learn a lot from and benefit from today. Thank you, Nadeem, for the very kind introduction. It's all because of your vision and because you wanted something like this to happen that today we're all together and discussing this. So really thrilled to have all of you here. And since the introductions have been done, I don't want to take further time. I just want to start today's session and chat, perhaps with Mr. Farid Khan. We'll pose the initial questions to him. Farid, thank you for joining us. I just wanted to start with, I'm going to pose a few questions to you, and then I'll allow you to take it forward based on that. And please feel free to speak on any other topics that, or to add to these questions as you deem appropriate. So firstly, I wanted to ask you that could you please elaborate on what exactly digital banking is? We hear a lot about it, and the way it is being practiced here, is that really digital banking? For most of us, we don't know that, and if you could elaborate, please. And also, what digital models are being pursued in financial institutions like yours in Pakistan, like also, the second question to you would be that could you let us know, enlighten us a little bit about the digital divide, because we hear a lot about it in Pakistan, those the haves and the haves not in terms of the digital technology. Also, you have a lot of experience internationally and locally in the capital markets and otherwise. So from your personal experience and from your professional experience through Finca Bank and in other Finca's own global experience, what would you say would be the best practices that we can bring to Pakistan, to our sort of economy, so as to enable financial inclusion through digital means? So that would be interesting for us to know. And then finally, the last question to you would be, really we'd like to know your thoughts, regarding the regulatory environment. We talk about a lot of challenges, and one of the challenges that we hear time and again is our regulatory challenges. So what do you think of the regulatory environment in Pakistan? And, which regulatory regime, in your opinion, would be a good one to emulate for us here in our, business environment? And any suggestions that you may have to the regulation, to the regulators and for regulations in our environment. So over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Malia. And once again, thank you so much for providing me this opportunity. I think just to start with the very first one, and I understand that you have thrown a lot at my way, so I'll just try to maybe cherry pick on a few important topics here, so as to consume my time more judicially. A digital bank and internet banking have often been used interchangeably in our part of the world, and the concept has evolved over a period of time. Now, what we talk of a digital bank now is a bank which has tried to move most of its services away from its brick and mortar structure and onto the Ethernet whether it's on the internet or whether it's on an application on your phone or your tablet. So basically banking on the go that you can do. And there is a wide spectrum of financial institutions who offer services on this platform. And that's where the second part of your question comes in, which is the different approaches that the banks are taking on this side. And the main concept of digital bank basically emanated from the fact that there was a big push towards increasing financial inclusion, providing customization of services to the users, as well as to for the banks as well, to reduce the cost of providing these services, so that the brick and mortar structure over a period of time had become a drag, and it was not allowing banks to fulfill their promise. So with the advent of 3G and 4G technology, there was a push to utilize the faster speed available of the internet and to allow users to conduct banking services over the internet. And so, you had your internet banking that was born, and over a period of time, it sort of evolved into a digital banking. And we have some very good examples globally of digital banks. You have DBS, in UK, you have a Sterling Bank. Even in emerging markets in South Africa, you have Zozo and Time Bank, Paytm and Digibank in India, for example. And the models that these banks are working on are a full-scale model, which is a fully digital retail bank. This is the bank which provides everything. It has the software, the hardware. It provides a full suite of services, and it's trying to cater to every type of customer, whether you're a borrower or a depositor. Every kind of service is available. And then you have some restricted players which primarily use certain parts of these services, which are normally called the marketplace banks. There they provide you convenience of shopping, or they act as a broker or an aggregator. Alipay is a good example of that. They provide you a service of payments and allow you to transact or do shopping for retailers as well as for wholesalers. And the third model is a more skeletal one, which is a banking as a service, where you just simply provide a payment service, or you simply provide a deposit service, or you act as a third-party agent for somebody. You don't own the software, you just provide a platform, people just plug in and they provide different kind of services using your license and your platform, and they access your clients. So these are the different spectrums of or approaches of a digital bank that are used globally. Each model has its own unique characteristics, pros and cons. Each depends on what kind of regulatory environment you're working with, and what is your appetite, what kind of customers you are trying to serve here. And when we talk about the digital promise, what it wanted to do and what it couldn't achieve, I think we have to see what these different models have achieved. For example, when specifically we talk about emerging economies or a country like Pakistan, there has been a growing digital divide where people who have access to latest gadgetry or access to internet have been able to transform part of their lives, transform part of their financial needs through the use of these digital platforms. But on the other hand, there's a vast majority of population which unfortunately has not been able to climb on this bandwagon. They do not have the means, whether it's the hardware, which is expensive, or they live in areas where unfortunately you don't have high-speed internet or 3G, 4G services available. So they are unfortunately not able to take advantage of it. Also, using these kind of services obviously requires that you have some sort of financial literacy. You need to understand the language. I mean, most of these softwares are in English. So if you are unable to converse in English or understand the menus, you are not tech savvy, you are unable to take full advantage of these things. So over a period of time, we have seen that some part of our population has actively embraced this change, whereas a large part is still trying to understand this phenomenon. And this is a great tragedy, because the internet was supposed to be a great equalizer. It was supposed to be a platform on which anybody can ride on. But unfortunately, in third world, and especially in Pakistan, we have not seen a large number of players who are sensitive to the needs and demands of this public, and they have unfortunately not been able to customize their offering or their products, which can be used by the masses. So हमारे पास जो अभी भी जो services हैं, they are for elites and they are for the upper strata of the society, high net worth individuals, or people who have a certain social profile. And that's where I think we need to catch up with the rest of the world. We have seen, again, I've given you examples like in Kenya and South Africa, countries which have similar profile of population as ours, but they have made huge strides in this area. Or having this platform, it can provide governments the much needed space through which they can intervene directly, and NGOs that can intervene directly to provide support and services to a large part of the population. A good example is the Benazir Income Support Program, or the SRS program that is now called. आपने देखा होगा कि during COVID crisis, utilizing the branchless banking, mobile wallets, using cell phones, SMS services, people were able to open bank accounts and were able to get support from the government. And this one example tells us that if this service were widespread and prevalent, it can have a huge impact on our society, not only in the financial field, but also in medicine and a lot of other areas, education, where it can help change lives of people who are otherwise not able to access such services. Obviously, problems jo aa rahe hain, and I'm moving quickly through your series of questions. The issues that we are facing in our part of the world are many, as some of which I've already explained. Technology barrier is one. Language barriers are severe. Value proposition is low, significantly. I mean, we are still seeing clients who are, or people who are unable to utilize these services effectively because unko samajh nahi aati, ya they are, they have this phobia of, doing interactions with the bank on the internet. Costs are very high. In fact, it's ridiculous that in a lot of time, the value proposition actually gives preference to cash transactions. So if I go to a bank branch today, take out cash and deposit it into someone else's account, there is no charge for it. But I want to transfer money electronically from my cell phone and deposit it to someone else's account, I am charged a percentage of the funds, which can be as high as up to 2,500 rupees per transaction. So why would I do that? I mean, these kind of things are actually, they're working against the adoption of such technologies. They are actually giving impetus to the cash economy, and that's where we need support from the regulator and the government to ensure that there's a push being made to make people use these channels instead of cash. And we have a huge cash economy. To wean people out of it would require a serious holistic approach. Simply presenting products is not going to do that. And that's where we come to the last part of your question, which is the regulatory input or the regulatory push that is required. As I said, there has to be incentive to go to digital, both for the customers as well as for the institutions. Some of these could be tax related, some of which could be documentation related, some of which could be cost related, as I have mentioned before. Interlinking of platforms. Now, we are living in Pakistan in a world where each bank has created its own platform. So if I'm with Bank A, my platform doesn't talk to Bank B, which is a huge issue. And look at what we have done with the ATM network. The entire country's ATM network is linked. So if we have these linkages with the entire banking system, it could revolutionize this process. So just like we have linked the ATM network, there is a need to link these platforms also through an aggregator who can function as a middleman. Then we have the anti-money laundering and regulations which are prohibiting people from opening remote accounts. Now, I'm all for the AML-CFT. It is a requirement of our times, but there has to be a threshold and a limit. It should not desist people. It should not push people away. Up to a certain level, whether it's $400 or $500, people should be allowed to open digital accounts and be able to transact through it. This threshold should be determined by the central bank, but it could be a huge booster. And I would say consumer protection. People are scared of using digital platforms because they feel that their money would be stolen. Money, once it goes out, they will not be able to trace it. So proper consumer protection, customer protection regulations to ensure, like in UK, you have a direct debit guarantee. If someone erroneously debits your account, you are protected by that guarantee. So similar things would help customers it will build their confidence. And once they start using it and they get hooked onto it, I don't think that they will look back. So thank you so much. I hope I have answered all of your questions.
Thank you, Fareed. Yes, you've answered, in detail, and thank you for that. I think it's very enriching, your thoughts, and I think they're very useful. And I hope people out there are listening to this and we can translate this into actual actions. These were great recommendations. And with that, I'll come to our next speaker, Mr. Suhir Khalik. Thank you so much, Suhir, for joining us. We're very thrilled again to have you here. For you also, I have a series of questions, and of course, feel free to speak on any other topics that you would like. But broadly speaking, our questions to you are that, Suhair, you have the most amazing global experience in telecom and in technology, and you've been, is associated with international as well as local, you were the CEO of Mobilinks, local companies in the technology field. So really drawing from all these experiences that you have, we would like you to little bit sort of make us understand what digital technology is and how we can benefit from it, as in, what would its manifestations be and what would its significance be in your, and is and can be, in your opinion, since you have all this experience abroad. Also, we'd also like to know about your insights, a little bit of your insights on your around your global professional journey. I've had the good fortune of hearing you at another webinar, and it's very inspiring what you've learned, and also with regards to how in your journey you have seen and understood digital financial empowerment, and how that can be sort of shared with the audiences and with the policymakers, and also some of the experiences that you've had setting up the National Incubation Center, leading the startups team up. You're the founder and the partner in Team Up. So what have your experiences been that would be very interesting for our audience. Also drawing from your current role as the Prime Minister's, you're a member of the Prime Minister's task force on IT and telecom. So there must be a lot that you're contributing, and so we want to learn from you and hear you on the policy side. What would your recommendations be? How can the policy gaps or problems be addressed? And finally, which is linked to all of your experiences, and do you think that if we really have to grow the digital economy and create that financial empowerment, are we equipped for it in terms of perhaps the level of skilled human capital? Do we have those skill levels? And the other question that comes to mind is the funding. I mean, you're involved with the startup world and the incubation center, and so do we have angel funding, VCs, which can enable such growth? So over to you now.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you for having me on this show. I think there's an urgent need for the discussion we're having right now, because we keep saying a lot of things, and yet there is so much more that needs to be done. And as Fareed very rightly pointed out, there is a digital divide in the country at this point in time. But let me also give you the positive side of it, the good news, if you will. We have a population of roughly about 220 million people in this country. 167 million of those people have access to a mobile phone today. That is roughly about 2.5 to 3 times the population of either France, Germany, or the UK. So we're already talking a lot of people who are actually connected. Now, again, out of that, maybe about 82 million people are today using 3G or 4G, which implies that they have access to a smartphone. So again, about just over a third of our population is using that as well. So that's the good news. And I think it bodes well for a country where we have those sort of numbers to base on what we need to do next, which is the digital leap of the title of this program. Now, having said that this is all great news, there's a lot, as I said, which also needs to be done to make this go forward in some way. When we talk digital, sometimes all we're thinking of is, oh, I've taken a digital image or a photo of my ID card, for example, and I'm done. That means I'm digital. But actually, that's just the first step, because then where are you going to store it and what are you going to do with it in terms of utilization? And if you send it to someone else, for example, will they be able to take it in the same manner? So that leads to digitalization. And that's the next step, in my vocabulary at least. And what that means is that you've actually got something of a storage in the cloud or on a server or something, and most of your files are going down in that direction. To give you another example, if we were to be taking minutes of the meeting today, of this meeting, and somebody said, well, you know, Maliha will take them down in handwriting. She will then have them typed up by a stenographer, and then we will send it to somebody else. And that would be the lowest form of digitization, if you will. But if you were to say, no, we will actually type it up while we are on air, immediately save it and email it to all the participants, we're already heading to the next stage of what I would call digitalization. When you get digital transformation, which is what we are looking for long-term in this country, or hopefully in medium term, we're looking at then everybody storing that on an access server or a cloud-based server, where they can have access to it, they can actually go into it, they can amend some of the wording and so on. So just a very mundane example of what the 3 stages might be. And I think that's what we have to aspire to go and do as soon as we can, because we have a very large population. And as you mentioned, if you look at some of the other countries, even emerging markets, which I've been a part of growth for many, many years now, I've had the good fortune to be working across the Middle East, the Levant, Asia, and Asia Pacific, and so on. And there are people who have moved on, and they are already in that digital transformation process, whether they are at the office or the home, or they're looking at a supermarket, or if you come down the value chain to in our words, a Karyana store or an SME business, they all need to be part of this phenomena as soon as they can be. Because what it does is gives them a whole new level of control over the information that they are carrying, the way they trade that information, the way they exchange that information with, whether it's peer-to-peer, or if they're doing this with, let's say, from citizen to government, or from government to citizen. And all of those stages have to be gone through one step at a time. And I think it's very important for us here to start looking at some of the issues that we have in holding this back at the moment. And I think Nadeem, sort of in his introductory remarks, alluded to some of that. And some of it is the government today does not have the capacity to operate on that level. So if you go to a ministry or a government office, they are still working on files. They're still, there are 5 levels of this e-governance program that is being instituted, by the way, 15 some years ago, which still hasn't been adopted by all of the government ministries and offices and so on. So there has to be a very straightforward focus on getting that happening very, very quickly. Because what it does is then it enables some things like the SARS program to become wider, more easily deployed, where you have government to citizen payments and government to citizen communications entirely digital. And there's no reason why we can't have that, because as I said, we have a very large population already connected through mobile, and a very large population connected on 3 and 4G. So I think it's a step in the right direction. We need to make sure that some of our policies, some of our focus, if you will, has to be in that direction and start making it happen. Now, there is natural resistance to this, because when you are operating in a certain way for 30, 40, 50 years, and as some of our civil service, our bureaucracy, even people in corporates, when get to a certain age, they're very comfortable with a certain way of doing business, whether it's punching a hole in a piece of paper and filing it. That is the way they've learned to do it. And to be able to receive something and then to file it in some place called the cloud may or may not be something that they're comfortable with. But that's the transition that we have to make. I'm very bullish because, again, another demographic which is very much in our favor is that 65% of our population is below the age of 30. And as opposed to, us who are, at a certain age and may or may not be accepting of this, these people are what I would call digital natives. So they are born into this. They are very comfortable with it. And I will even take the liberty of saying that it crosses all economic segments to an extent. Even if you go to rural areas and you talk to young people there, they are far more familiar with, manipulating the features on their iPhone or Samsung, or even if it's a low-end, phone which only offers you basic services. They are able to handle that very quickly. And our job, I think, as people who are in this area, in this sector, our telecom operators, our government, our ministries, should be in the business of trying to push this towards those people and to educate those people in trying to adopt this very, very quickly. But it will only happen if we, the people at the policy making and in the government stage, are equally, let's say, comfortable with the technology in this case. So I think that's a very important point to note. When you talk about digital financial empowerment, I think Fareed has referred to some of it already. But if you look at today, you look at somewhere like Kenya, and you look at a product called M-Pesa. Now, I had the opportunity of driving through Kenya from Nairobi to a game reserve about four years ago. It was roughly 400 miles. So kind of the distance from, let's say, from here to Lahore. And on the way, obviously, we made various stops to buy a cold drink or a cup of tea. And I was quite impressed that almost every single person, 9 out of 10 of those people on the, jisko hum redi wala kehte hain, karyana store, they would refuse cash payments. They would say, I will take M-Pesa only, sir. And that was phenomenal. And that was 4 or 5 years ago. And we need to get to that stage very quickly. And again, there are lots of issues around that. It's not just a government issue. It's the issue of the Central Bank of Pakistan. It is also the issue of every commercial bank in Pakistan to be able to enable that process to happen. And there's so many steps that we need to be taking down there. It could take me the rest of the evening to outline them. But if you like, I can share those later on with you. But needless to say, it's got to be a more holistic approach that we need to take. It's not just one section of our society which needs to make this happen. It's across the board. And also, to an extent, it's the telecom operators. They need to supply, make it easier to sign up. Make it easier to use a smartphone, make it easier to pay for it, for example. But at the same time, then when you start accusing those people and pointing fingers at them, you have to look at some of the policies which need to change. Right now, we're in the middle of for the last 2.5 years, we are in a very strange situation where we are at odds with the renewal of the very lifeline of the operators, the spectrum. The licenses that they are given to operate in this country are at risk at this point in time because various people, various parties have decided to contest the pricing, the way it's been given. There's something, the word that we use called technology neutrality, and all of those concepts are being tested right now. And I think we need to be able to get past them, to resolve them, to give comfort to the telecom operators that they will have a future where they will not be paying over the odds for the licenses that they are going to be operating, and move forward with that. Because remember, we are a country where although we try and use the latest technology most of the time, and we are at 4G at this point in most of the country, that equipment, those services are imported. They're imported at dollar costs on the international market. However, when you look at what we call the ARPU, the ARPU as we call it, the average revenue per user, we are at about $1.50 average revenue per user per month, which is shockingly low. And all credit to the mobile operators for still running businesses which are delivering every day and delivering at the cutting edge. But if you compare that with for example, a United Kingdom, we're talking $35 to $40 average revenue per user, or the US, which will be again $25 to $30 per user per month. So the contrast is huge. So we shouldn't be then comparing the license fees that have been charged in those countries with the license fees that we try and justify in this country. And I think that makes it a little bit more difficult for things to roll forward in the way that they should at this point in time. We also have policy issues where we need to address them very, very quickly. For example, when beyond the licensing and spectrum issues, there is the issue of what is called the right of way. So when a telecom operators are going down and laying more optic fiber in the ground so that he can then connect his what are called base stations from one end to the other to offer that fast internet service, which is we know as 4G. Owners of the land, and in most cases it is government land or belongs to Pakistan Railway or somebody else, they are treating it as a revenue opportunity, and they are therefore demanding huge amounts of money to give that right of way for the operators to actually deploy their network, and that holds people back as well. We have at the moment a huge opportunity because 15 years ago, the telecom policy in 2004 basically created two very interesting funds, one called the Universal Service Fund and one called the ICT R&D Fund, today known as the Ignite Technology Fund. And between them, there's hundreds of millions of dollars which are in the bank. And this is not taxpayer money. This is money contributed by the telecom operators as a percentage of their annual revenues into these funds. And the funds are meant to be deployed for this very reason. They're deployed to be able to make it easy to roll out network to rural areas, to far-flung areas, or even, I would argue beyond rural. You look at a city like Karachi, 25 million people, you know, urban and rural and semi-rural. And I would treat that as an immediate necessity, or a Lahore or Faisalabad or any of these cities, where this is urgently needed. And therefore we need to have a new perspective on what we charge the operators, what we try and tax them on. Coming to taxes, the telecom industry is the highest of taxpayers in this country today. When a person takes a scratch card and scratches 100 rupee scratch card, 30 rupees of that goes straight to the government treasury. So the subscriber is already paid approximately almost a third of his contribution, which should have gone to the telco, actually to the government. And that is collected, and it's a surefire way of collecting because it's captive. You know, the telecom operator actually collects it on behalf of the government and deposits it in the government treasuries. And it's by far one of the highest in the world. And I've had the opportunity to work in various parts, as you mentioned earlier, of the world. And I can assure you that it is probably the highest in the world at this point in time. And we need to, again, review that and say, does that make sense when we talk about a digital Pakistan? None of those things actually add up to facilitate where we want to be. And I think that I've said a lot already. I will come to, I think I mentioned the policy challenges in these arguments. My recent experience of the last 3.5 years of getting involved in setting up the National Incubation Center, which was then appreciated to an extent where the government came back and allocated 4 other provincial incubation centers as well, clearly recognizing the success of what we've been trying to do. And the dream there was, and this is purely a give back on my part, my co-founder Pervez Abbasi's part, is to be able to say, how can we share our experience, our knowledge, and our best practices learned over the years with young people trying to get into the technology business. And I think that's been an extremely rewarding, extremely gratifying experience on all accounts, because the people we meet on a daily basis are people between, let's say, 20 and 35 years of age. They invariably have fantastic ideas, which they, in many, many cases, and a lot of cases, they have transformed into now running businesses which are serving the people of Pakistan. And it stretches across an entire spectrum, whether it's education or agri-tech or e-commerce, e-health, artificial intelligence, machine learning, you name it, fintech, and you name it, and they have an idea which they are capable of turning into a business, obviously with some of the help and input that our team gives them as well. But I think that is an extremely gratifying experience. And it is, to me, the future of Pakistan, because with the kind of population that we have, we'll never be able to create those jobs in the government. And in fact, it would be the wrong thing to do. Most of the corporations in the country can only afford to have so many jobs that they can hire every year. So it is imperative that we as a nation are creating a base of people who are creating their own businesses and therefore creating more jobs for other people. And if it's in technology, fantastic. To me, that is the best possible outcome of what we are trying to do at this point in time. To address those two particular questions you had about skilled human capital, yes, you do at one end, but again, this is kind of biased because again, it emphasizes the digital divide to a certain extent. So most of these people are coming out of colleges and universities. That implies they're coming out of most of the major cities and towns and are able then to get to the National Incubation Center and do their stuff. But when we look at our average IT skills, they are good, the people are bright, but the skill development is at the lowest level. So when we go into the international market and we talk about exporting our IT knowledge and working, the BPO process and so on, we end up at the lowest skill level, unfortunately, because even countries like Vietnam and Myanmar and the Philippines are way ahead in having trained their people to that next level of skill in IT and software development and software management and so on. And I think there's an imperative need, I've said this many times before, I think we need to declare almost a national education emergency where we are able to get together and train people and upskill them so that they are able to get the right skill level contracts and jobs in the international market. So that's kind of around the human skill issue. When we come to access to funding, well, the good news here is that in the last 3.5 years, 4 years, where we had virtually no VC funds in this country, we now have around 15 venture capital funds in this country today. And between them, they have, I think, to the extent of, they're offering to the extent of maybe 250 to 300 million US dollars of available funding to the right startups to carry those businesses forward. And I think that's a fantastic development. We've also had some very interesting developments recently after months and maybe a year or two of lobbying with the SECP, where they finally now recognize startups as a category within the SECP. They've also recognized the ability to, for example, award stock option plans to these, when startups normally start a business, they do not have this cash funding available to pay some of the brightest minds who are going to come and work for them. And traditionally in a startup, that's what you do. You allocate share options to the best of the people so that one day when the business is successful, all of them can cash in, as it were, on the rewards. I think that's been addressed. There are other issues which are still pending and need to be resolved. There's a lot of issues around, for example, with the central bank, where we need to be able to recognize, a young person coming out and trying to establish a bank account. It's not just the digital issues we are concerned about, it's also the regulatory issues which are holding some of this back. And I think we need to be able to resolve those. It's not rocket science, it's being done everywhere else in the world. And we just need to be able to say, how does it fit into our system and make it happen as quickly as possible. And all of these steps would basically free up the environment, the ecosystem, to enable the growth of digital technology in this country, and the realization of the digital Pakistan dream will be that much sooner and that much quicker. I think I've spoken a lot, but I can go on. I'll stop for the moment.
Thank you so much. That was so much for us to learn and to understand and to sort of digest, I think, because I think at least it was interesting to know that, you know, so much is being contributed by technology, and you know, you know, how enabling it can be. Yet our policies and even some of our regulations and all make it so difficult and in fact costly, in fact, which is something Fareed also mentioned, for people to use it, and the low levels of skill was also something that I think is something we need to address very soon, and the wonderful you know, sort of you know, opportunities that you spoke about that are available if we can, you know, get up to speed with what we have to do. So thanks for that. There's a lot you know, that you have told us, and I think we can talk about this another time also, because there's so much to discuss further and work on. I'll now go to our next very respected and accomplished speaker, Mr. Azaz Hussain. Thank you so much, sir, for being here with us. It's an honor to have you as a founder, as CEO, and now chairman of Systems Limited. It's so fascinating that in 1977 you started that, and so really you're a pioneer and a stalwart of this industry, and we're so honored that you're here to talk to us, you know, and you must have seen, you know, the entire evolution of the technology industry and, you know, of software itself. And we would really like to, first of all, get your view and your perspective on how this new normal, the recent, you know, 1 year of that we have spent almost, which has changed us, the new normal has impacted the industry, and how it has maybe changed it, or changed at least the trajectory it was going on. So we would like to hear from you that. And also, you have experience, and you have been giving software and providing software solutions for businesses and enabling software business solutions. So I would like to understand, both here and in the USA, through VisionNet. So I would like to understand, we would like to understand if there are any specific solutions that have been effectively used in financial institutions and in sort of digital banks that, you know, we could use here. Fareed spoke of how the cost is sometimes, you know, a deterrent for institutions to move in that direction and for businesses to become more effective. So perhaps that would be very useful in our context of today's conversation. Also, you know, what in your view are still the gaps that need to be covered by our industry, specifically in the software area, which is an enabling area for if we have to speak of financial empowerment. Those gaps would be interesting to learn about. And finally, what do you think currently, because you're comparing, I'm sure, the business in the USA and how businesses are working there, and how Pakistani businesses are working, and because you supply software to both, you know, what are their challenges in adopting technology and these business enabling solutions in your experience and observation? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Malia, for the introduction and for your question. If you allow me, I will, before I get to the questions that you have posed, I will start off by trying to answer Dr. Huck's question when he started this webinar. He talked about having to wait half his life for this digital Pakistan too. So I think because he's been in the corridors of power for these last 50 years, while I've been in the trenches of the IT journey in Pakistan for the same period, I think it's important for him and for the rest of the audience to understand what this journey has been. I believe that if you want to get somewhere, you must know where you are and where you're coming from. So let me first answer that question, and then I'll come back to some of the issues that you've raised. I've been in this industry for 49 years. It'll be 50 years next year. So amongst the earlier people who were in this profession, and I started when this technology was banned in Pakistan. There was an official ban for the import of computers or any related technology. And I spent my first 11, 12 years under this ban, still trying to create a journey towards a digital Pakistan. And I think to some extent we succeeded. This ban continued till 1982, later part of 1982. And the only reason we could start a company in IT was that we got hold of an old computer which WAPDA had thrown out. And we put it together and we started a company around it and started offering services on that old machine. And then applied to import one, and it took us 4 years. The interesting thing is that during those, not 4, but 6 years, 2 years before we applied and the 4 years while we were waiting, the government had proudly stated that other than allowing a computer for the Pakistan Air Force and one for the Pakistan Army, nobody had been allowed to import one. Very proudly, and they said that, you know, this is how effective our control is over this technology. So, you know, that's the background that we come from. And unfortunately, when the government took the ban out because of the world's reaction to our nuclear plans, immediately, literally a month before they did, after they did that, the US and the EU put a ban on export of information technology equipment to Pakistan. I'm talking of 82, 83. And that continued for another 2-3 years. So that was the availability while the whole world was getting onto this digital journey. We had been kept out of it. And then when it did start coming in, it was initially very expensive. I remember we used to hold a competition, a sort of a national game where people participated from all over Pakistan. And people wanted to, as a first prize, the team of 3, they wanted to get a desktop computer each. And I couldn't give it to them because the desktop computer cost 3 times more than a car did. A car cost at that time, a Suzuki, small Suzuki cost 53,000, and a basic desktop with very low performance cost 150,000 rupees. So, you know, it was very expensive. So it was still kept out of everybody's reach. It started getting cheaper, but then it's not just computers, as Mr. Suhir Khalik has said, it's a whole holistic thing that you've got to not only have computers or the ability to use them, you must also have communication. So at that time, the predecessor to PTCL, the PT&T, had a stranglehold on communication. They said that data communication is something which we are not going to allow anybody to do because it might erode our voice traffic. And there'll be great traffic and this, that, and the other, and they won't allow it. It's only in 99 or early 2000 that the Ministry of IT came up, and PT&T came under that rather than being under the Ministry of Communication, which was roads, bridges, and ports and telecommunication. So these two were separated. And that is the time when I think the best thing which happened to the entire IT industry in Pakistan, that the telecom part of it was deregulated and people were allowed a certain amount of deregulation, and they were allowed to sort of compete with PT&T or PTCL and have an alternate to it. And you've seen, as Mr. Khalik said, you've seen this burst of energy in that sector, that we've gone to 160 million. The fixed line phones never exceeded 4 million. And it was considered you had to be at least a relative of a minister to get a phone connection in those days. So we saw that stranglehold, and that began to sort of loosen up 2001, 2002, because some alternatives started coming in. It took about 6-7 years for that grip to be totally loosened and communication technology being available at an affordable price for people to start using this. And I think since then, it has been an excellent enabling environment, and people have used or have transformed their activities to digital activities fairly effectively. The government has been slow in it because I think the government has an attitude problem over control over information or the sharing of information, which is more of an inhibitor than the enabling environment or the technology or the cost of technology. So that started, I think, to some extent, the non-government sector went through major transformation and major digitization in the last 10, 12 years, and that has totally changed here. I think if I get to the second part, before I get into talking about my company or what we do, which is in the financial sector, because I think we don't have much time left. It's the digital divide seems to have reduced, or is not that clear, but the financial divide, or the financial apartheid, as I would call it, is become even stronger. There's the commercial banking sector, and I do not in that include Mr. Farid Khan's institution and many such who have done some remarkable work. But I'm talking of the traditional banking sector, just doesn't get it or does not want to get financial inclusion as a concept. It seems to be beyond them. It is not of any interest, and they don't have any ability to sort of have any impact in that. But remember, I mean, on the other hand, they have invested heavily in digitalization, and people like me or people who are banked in this country, the quality of service we are getting today is dramatically different to what we could get 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I can pay my bills from my online bank, and I don't know why Dr. Haq can't do it. I can move money from one account to the other. I can send money to somebody, and I can do it on my phone even. But then I am a bank account holder. What we forget in all of this is that even by the most liberal of the measures, that's less than 15% of the population of this country. The remaining still operate in a pure cash economy, and fine, I mean, that's an apartheid which we got used to. But more importantly, the micro enterprises, and you got, I'm told, I stand corrected by the PIDE information, but I'm told there are almost 3 million such enterprises, which make up almost 50% of our economy. They are not banked, and they have no such access. And these are, as Mr. Suhir Khalik said, from the Fortune ki dukaan or the khoka, which is an essential part of our overall economy. They're this undocumented, purely in the cash, and they need to be brought into this. And they have a need for financial services, and they have an expressed need for financial services. The problem is that there's an attitude by the government which includes, which is exhibited in their regulatory framework and also in their policy making, which severely inhibits this. Let me share with you, I am involved in a company, it's one of our subsidiaries, which is a fintech. It's been going on for 5 years. It's financially sound. It's almost profitable. Has processes about 300,000-400,000 transactions a day, does well over, the exact number I forget, but its transactions are worth about $1.5 billion rupees a month. And we had applied to the State Bank of Pakistan for an e-money license, which took years to make. The e-money regulatory framework took 5 years, and finally it was announced last year. And it was made, and we, along with 5 other organizations, were granted the license in February. It's been 6 months, and we were told as part of the license, for us to be able to operate, we've got to have an agreement with NADRA to be able to have the KYC, etc. We still don't have an agreement. And when we do get the agreement, how much NADRA is going to charge us? Should they be charging us? Should they be charging for any of the activities? Now, this is a national database. This is one of the problems which I would like Dr. Haq to address, is that why does the government charge for every service that they provide to its citizens after they have taxed us? To the telecommunication user, as Mr. Suhir Khalik very rightly said, the taxation is huge. There's even a tax on getting your SIM started. There's a tax on you using airtime, and it's huge, that tax. So why then should my KYC be charged also separately? Why should my checking of my credentials be charged? Why should NADRA make billions of rupees from the banking sector? For what? NADRA is a regular part of the government. They're performing an excellent role. They have a great system, and I think that's the backbone of our digitalization system. But why should they make money out of it? Why should the Board of Revenue, if they have digitized the land record, why should they be charging for a Shajara Aks? Why can't this be a free service to the citizens? It's a question that I would like the economic management of this country to answer, because all of this adds to the cost of doing business, any kinds of business, and particularly adds to the cost of the financial services and severely inhibits the financial services. So what happens here is that because these millions of micro enterprises have no access to financial services or the formal financial services, they have to resort to the informal financial services, which you all know are extortionist. And that adds to their cost, and that adds to the cost to the consumer, that adds to the, so all of this. So the ability for the digital technology to be used is not inhibited today because of the lack of technology. That was so, as I told you historically, that is not so. Communication is cheap, the technology is cheap, the skills exist, and people want to use it. But it's the regulatory framework and the government's attitude toward its use which is holding it back. There's nothing else. So, Dr. Saab, you may wait for another 50 years for Digital Pakistan to arrive, or you may make some changes to contributing toward this coming soon enough. Regarding your other questions, I'll very briefly mention that yes, we do a lot of service for financial organizations, particularly in the US, and it's not just, we do a lot of software services, they license our products from us, and we also do BPO services, particularly for financial. And this pandemic has been a boom for us because the interest rates falling in the US has meant that everybody is buying mortgages and are borrowing money. And because those loans, etc., are processed using our software and also our BPO services, it's a boom for us. But So with everybody else having a problem, we've grown our revenue, particularly from the US, by almost 30% in the last 6 months. It's also taken away the shyness because some of our clients in the Middle East would only have work done on site. And they said, no, we don't trust our work to be done in Pakistan. We want it done here in Qatar or in Dubai, and we bring the people here. And because of this work from home, we've moved over 120 people from those locations back into Pakistan. So our revenue may have fallen for those because we charge a much higher figure for people working on site, but our export in it has increased, which is one of the major targets that we have in our mind. So the pandemic, in particularly our industry, has helped to some extent. It has had a lot of problems in terms of us being able to get new business because it's not easy to sell remotely. But we're sort of keeping up with that. Skills, slightly different view to Mr. Khalik. Yes, if you're talking of starting 100,000 or a 20,000 people software company in Pakistan, you will have to go through a lot of problems in being able to create that level of skill. But at our level of 3,000 people, we don't have that problem. I think we get very, very bright people, and there are at least half a dozen institutions here who are teaching computer science with fairly good level of faculty, so their output is good, and we're happy with it. Every year we hire 100 fresh graduates. We hope that we always want them to know more, but they are trainable, they are productive, and we use them well, and we use them to compete with the world. Whether it's the US market or European market, we compete with these people. And we haven't had any major problem. So with that, I will just wind up, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. That was very, very insightful, and we learned a lot. And it's actually good to know that the pandemic has been good for the industry. And in your case, it has also brought a lot of confidence in the Pakistani talent and Pakistani companies, at least in the Middle East, and that's actually a positive. I now thank our speakers for answering the initial questions and for the insights, and I'll hand over to Dr. Nadeem Haq for taking the session forward. Dr. Saab, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Malhiya. Thank you very much, folks. This has been a wonderful discussion. I've learned a lot, but I must confess that I am still unmoved as us, Suhir. I still see that the promise will elude us. We sat there and watched the jeans revolution go by. We sat there and watched the tourism revolution go by. We sat there and watched the car revolution go by. So we've missed many a revolution, and I think we're going to miss a digital revolution too. I'll tell you why I think that. Because as all of you said, the elephant in the room is the policy and the government. And Azad, you're very eloquent on that. Yes, I recall all those things that you said. And yes, we have just put a tax on mobile phones. The Apple iPhone now is twice what it costs in the US. And of course, that means that kids who are going to make apps for Apple will have to incur a huge capital cost. Yes, we are always in the process of shooting ourselves in the foot. So I think we'll continue to do that. Secondly, you mentioned, all of you mentioned governance issues, the law issues, and various issues that are going to hold us back. So I must confess that I'm a little dismayed by this, but not encouraged. And then Suhir mentioned that there's a human capital issue. You also, in a sense, as mentioned that, you said that there's, at the 3K level, you're happy, but at the 100K level, it's a problem. But we've got a 220 million people economy, 100 million youth. So we should talk in millions. I don't even talk in 100,000. I talk in millions always. And I think, quite frankly, we really need to think big. But the question is really, our policymakers are not capable of thinking. So, you know, you guys have been working in this area. Let me ask you quickly, Suhir, this telecom policy or this new IT policy, is this really going to work? Or is it just another one of those policies? I've seen so many policies in my life and none of them have worked. So please, quickly, very quickly, can you tell us, is this a policy?
I think Nadeem, you know, I mean, I share some of your skepticism, but I'm also an eternal optimist. So I look at the policy, it's a policy, it's a good policy. The question is, are we going to be able to implement the policy and its various parts of it in the framework? And I think it's not rocket science to be able to do that. If we can, then I think we are onto a good path very, very quickly.
Quick question. The government understands, but two quick questions. Who in the government understands this policy?
A lot of people do, but I think we need to get consensus with the various different sections of government at this stage. And I think once we get the consensus, as I said, it's not rocket science. It's not very complicated.
No, Suhir, I don't think anything is rocket science. But the question is, in our government, everything is rocket science. Because we really don't, we make policy after policy, and most of the policy are written by somebody else and we don't understand. Do you think anybody understands policy in our government? This IT policy, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Azaz Hussain.
Gee, I'm not really familiar what the current policy is, but I've seen a lot of policies. They all make sense. They all are what we want to achieve. The question, as Suhir rightly said, it's our ability to you know, implement them. I mean, it requires major change in the way that the government is structured and thinks. It has to stop thinking of making money out of information. I tried to give you some examples of that. That is not what the government's role is. Tax us. If I'm making money, tax me as much as you like. But don't tax the use of my phone, because you're taxing everybody across the board on that. It's costing me nothing in percentage terms.
Good point. Very good point. Tell me, Fareed Khan Sahab, is the legal system capable of doing what you want it to do? I mean, I find that our legal system runs short. For example, I can't use DocuSign in this country. For example, I have to sign papers in triplicate of sextuplet. I have to go to various places to physically sign documents. Whereas in the US 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, I could use DocuSign, never had to show up, had to do it. And I can use PayPal, etc. So is legal framework, does it help us, or is it still sitting in the 19th century?
No, I think you have touched a raw nerve here. I think the legal system is perhaps the weakest link in this whole chain. It is miles, light years away from where it could be. And unfortunately, we can have the hardware and the software and, maybe part of the regulatory environment in place. But, this side, the legal framework, the ability of companies to register their patents, to protect their intellectual property rights, and for, people to conduct transactions electronically, creating repository of data, storage of information. I think that is one area where I think a lot of work needs to be done. We are nowhere there, actually.
So the legal system is not working, the organization is not working, nobody understands the policy. Okay, fair enough. Let me go to the computer companies. Look, I think, Azaz, you've been dealing with data for a long time. I remember you, when you were in the old Chambers of Commerce building, you were dealing with data then. Now they say data is the new oil. We have big data with us. How are we using it? Are we using it? You mentioned Nadra. Yes, we have the National ID system, which is a very good system. I'm a fan of it. But for God's sakes, I'm still handing physical copies of my ID card today. Nobody accepts the electronic form of the ID card. So Azaz, am I wrong in saying that we are still sitting in the primitive era? But more importantly, can you please tell me, why are we not making use of big data? Where are our big data firms? How are we using big data to help us in various things? On the other hand, everybody in the West is coming and taking our data. Facebook, etc. Forget that. Even the consulting firms in the West, everybody's taking our data. You're right, the government is charging you for data, but we are giving away free data everywhere, and we are not using data as a new oil. What's your take on that?
You know, about the NADRA thing, I mentioned it earlier. I mean, the reason you got to give copies is that if you don't give a copies, NADRA will charge them if they want to be, and they don't connect with them. So we have been sitting on a e-money license to be able to become an e-money institution for 6 months, but we cannot take anybody's money unless we have the linkage with NADRA, and they'll take their time and we will wait for it. But on the data thing, yes, there's a lot of data. There's no dearth of data, and there's a lot of knowledge here on how to use that data. For instance, any financial organization or any bank, one of the most important factor for them to be able to operate at a consumer or at a micro enterprise level is the credit worthiness of that, the credit behavior of that, their bill payment behavior. Now, every utility, all the utilities, barring K Electric, is a government-owned utility. All that data is public data. I mean, why can't this be shared with a consumer credit rating company, which can say that Azaz Hussain pays his bill on time or he doesn't pay his bill on time? And that should impact anybody's decision to lend me money or not. And that anywhere in the world would be enough information for a financial organization to take a risk to give a loan to somebody. The fact that I'm paying bills should be enough information. I get when I'm in the US, I get a discounted, I get a loan at a discounted rate because my credit worthiness is good, because my credit behavior is good. Now that is not being monitored. The State Bank has license, and it took them 20 years to come up with the regulatory framework to have a credit rating, consumer credit rating agency. But nobody is in actually operation at the moment. So, you know, all this data is there. Look at the data of your utility companies. Look at the data of NADRA. Look at the data of your, you know, the 10 other organizations. Look at the capital markets data. All of it is there. And today you have the technology to be able to use it to do any sort of predictive projections that you want to. But you don't want to.
No, but let me come to this. Suhir, the corporate sector doesn't want to use it too. I don't see the corporate sector demanding data utilization and using data for their own profit advantage. Why not?
I totally agree with you. I mean, and I just look at the telco sector, and I'm sorry if I'm going to offend a few of my colleagues here, or former colleagues. But between the 4 telcos and PTCL, you've probably got data on about 170, 180 million people.
Probably the whole population, yeah.
Virtually the whole addressable population at this stage, and they're doing absolutely nothing with it today. The banks are sitting on tons and tons of data, and I'm sorry, they're not using it. And I think, as I said earlier in my talk, we can continue to blame government for a lot of it, but we as corporate citizens, as you know, bankers, as you know, business people, are not doing our bit either. And sometimes that's what needs to be done to make things move forward. And then maybe the government will play catch up. And I think that's the attitude I've taken in the past in my career. And I would, you know, want to have people doing the same today. I think that's the way to do it today.
So the corporate sector, even the multinationals, for example, the big multinationals, I won't name them for obvious reasons, but even they are not demanding data analysis of the sort. PIDE is capable of doing some data analysis. I won't say we are the best in the world, but I go and talk to these guys. Those guys have no demand for data analysis because they think that data is not going to make them money. And as I said, we have no data analysis companies. Like, for example, take Salesforce, for example, or take, what other company I can think of? They're all data processing companies that use data to do things for various people, and we are not doing, which brings me to my next question. Artificial intelligence. Do we have capability of artificial intelligence in this country, or are we still sitting in the computing of yesterday?
No, we have enough to be able to meet the requirements of this country. And let me correct you. There are private sector which is using data analysis and AI, both. And there are companies which are specializing in just this, just this activity. There are software companies which only do this. I'll give you an example of because we do a lot of data science work and AI work for our retail customers in the US. It started because we were doing it for some of our retail customers in this country. And I'll give you one example of one of our major customers, which is a well-known organization called PIDE. We do a lot of their e-commerce as well as their brick and mortar thing for them, their ERP. And they do a lot of data analysis of what they should be producing, and very effectively. I think the banks are using data a lot for cross-selling their products, not as much as they should be, but they're beginning to use it. So the ability is there, the need is there. The government has the highest need, but then the government has other ways of doing their analysis or making their own projections. They're not dependent on this.
No, I appreciate the government, but I'm worried about the private sector. I hear what you're saying about Khadi, and I hear what you're saying about the bank. But do you think that the managers in the private sector are aware of the need for artificial intelligence in data in their day-to-day management or in their long-term management as much as you would like them to, or are we lagging behind? How much are we lagging behind?
We probably have 6 months to a year behind the same managers in the US. It's a new technology everywhere.
6 months to a year. Okay. QG, Farisna, would you agree with that?
I would say that, banks especially, and I can talk about the financial sector, that they have started mining data more aggressively now. There is increasing realization, and there are a lot of specialist companies who are now helping banks like ours to mine data and create, for example, credit scoring models, whereby we are able to take credit decisions in seconds. Similarly, robotic process automations and algorithms which are driving most of our systems, where we do like Nadra Verisis checks automatically. We convert applications into different languages now automatically. So, I mean, things are, in terms of artificial intelligence and data mining, have started. We are definitely behind the curve, but I think there is realization. Companies are budgeting for these expenses, and there is now an increased propensity to use
Okay, that's great news. Suhir sir, what about the telcos? Telcos still seem to be telcos. They're not moving in any direction apart from telcos. I see they are not even becoming cable companies. They're not becoming internet companies. They're still telcos. So they're kind of behind the curve, aren't they?
They are. I think they're at least. And by the way, this criticism is only not just for telcos in Pakistan. Telcos have just spent many years in the United Kingdom. Even telcos there are not able to think beyond what they used to be 10 years ago, which is you put up a base station, you put up a new switch, and you gather more customers and you collect the revenue. And yes, they all talk about digital and digitization, but to be honest, they are, I think, way behind, because the whole area of OTTs, or the over-the-top companies, as we call them, technology companies, they are way ahead of them. And we mentioned some of them, like Facebook and others. I mean, if you go on Facebook and click on, if you go on Google, for example, you click on a product that you want to buy. Let's say you wanted to buy a new laptop. Within minutes, you will start getting ads on your Facebook page, which are referring to laptops, for example. So that's how quick all of this happens, and yet we are, as telcos, and as I said, not just in Pakistan, even abroad, even in the US, they are not able to use that data mining. They're not able to translate that into growing their businesses anyway. And that's unfortunate for now.
It's even worse when I talk near my telephone. Next time the ad shows up, things are happening. So that's great. That's wonderful. But last question, infrastructure. I'm very worried. I get knocked out of Zoom meetings. I get knocked out of my internet every day. I spoke to some of the telco, the internet company people, for example, PTCL and the new thing, Storm Fiber. They are telling me exactly what you said, Zuhair Saab, that right-of-ways are very difficult to get. Fiber optics are very difficult to lay. Plus, the gateway is very congested. And that the ministry does not realize that this needs long-term planning, not just reaction. Are we going to be internet starved?
We will be very quickly. I think we are. Some of us are experiencing it, as you've said, Nadeem, at the moment. And unless we act very, very quickly now, this is the new way of life for a lot of people anyway. What is happening right now with COVID, it'll change way people do business, the way they do their work. And a lot of it, even when hopefully all of this goes away, people have begun to realize that I can sit in my own room and connect with the whole world and do my business to a large extent, which is something that we were not used to in the past or didn't want to accept in the past, although it's been possible for a long time. But just in the last, and I was talking to a couple of the people you mentioned in terms of internet usage. Internet usage, I understand, in Pakistan has gone up by about 35% in the last 4 to 5 months. And that is starting to put pressure on the pipes, as it were, you know, the optic fiber pipes, the signal from your, if you're using obviously Ethernet, but if you're using mobile internet, then it's starting to put pressure not only on, as I mentioned earlier, the optic fiber connections between cell sites, but also from cell site to customer. So, and that's the spectrum part that I mentioned earlier. Now, all of those things, as I said, have to be taken in a very holistic way, because you can't just say, I'm going to go digital tomorrow because I have more data than you. It's got to be the whole infrastructure which has to follow. It has to be put together. Somebody up there has to realize that all of these dots are connected. And unless they are connected and facilitated, this will not happen. And I think we will be data starved. We will be internet starved very, very quickly.
Finally,
I think here is another area where the government has to stop taxation and stop making money out of it.
Absolutely. We have to stop making money out of all this. And you mentioned, as Asab, you mentioned Nadra. I mean, this should not be a profit center. It should be a service to the nation. It's one example.
Azaz, very quickly, tell me, the youth unemployment problem. We are still educating people in the traditional way, sending them to school physically for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Are you looking for degrees? When you hire people, are you looking for skills? Can we skill people in shorter durations, but then there's no demand? But in any case, can we skill people in shorter durations? Will technology help us to skill people easier, or should we continue to use the same old technology with the textbook board and the single national curriculum?
Nadeem, you know, I come from a generation where when we used to hire people, they had never even seen a computer. But we could train them very quickly in how to program it. And so I'm not really looking for the cooked stuff. I'm really looking for people who have basic intelligence and have the yearning to learn, and they, you know, have the cognitive skills. So this is what we're looking at. And of course, if they've been through a 4-year degree program and they've been selected into a computer science place like FAST or LUMS or GKI or whatever, so, you know, they've been picked from a larger number. So one is very happy with that, and you have to mold them. You've got to train them, because remember, we're not hiring, or we're not looking, and we cannot expand with simply people who have been given computer science lessons. We need people who can solve a problem, which means that they can hear a problem, understand it, comprehend it, and come up with the solution. That's what the software industry is about. Now, having knowledge of a computer language or some other technology is useful. It's tools which they can easily learn. But we need them to have a higher intelligence and the desire to, you know, work hard at it. The difficult part of our people is that you can't run a whole army with just soldiers or you know, at the lowest level. You've got to have captains, majors, colonels, brigadiers, generals, and all of those. That middle management, we're not creating large enough of. And whatever we create, we lose a lot to the world. So that is the only inhibiting factor in the skill side, is the middle management and the growth of that, because that takes its own time. You don't graduate a brigadier, it takes time for him to become that, and he can then command a certain number of troops. So there are these factors, but I think if you look at from the rest of the industry, for every year that a child has been in school, his productivity goes up 2% no matter what he does, whether he's driving a tractor or he's in a textile mill. So we just want somebody who spent at least 10, 12 years in school, and you can train them into anything.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me take some questions now. Sundus Raza. Sayyid Sundus Raza. Sundus Raza. Ji Sundus, bole.
Hello.
Ji, go ahead.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum to everybody. My name is Sundus Raza and I'm a PhD scholar at University of Limerick, Ireland. I have one comment and one question very quickly. Though Mr. Fareed have already like partly answered one of my question. As I'm living in EU and I have seen a lot of digitalization here in Europe. But one thing which really bugs me about Pakistan is the cybersecurity. I mean, if I am doing a remittance into the Pakistani account, is there any cybersecurity, or as there's as in EU they have a GDPR law? Is my data protected? Is any agency have access to my data, that how much money I'm transferring, how much to which account I'm transferring? I'm a little bit concerned about this, that if there is any GDPR sort of law in Pakistan in place, and what about the cybersecurity? The other is my comment, and that is that there are some things that are really good that are happening on the digital platform. As an overseas Pakistani, I have ease of making or renewing my passport online just by sitting at my home. So that there are some things that are good, which are happening in the digital arena. But my matter of concern or question of concern is the cybersecurity and laws around my data protection. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Just try and remember the question. I'll come back to it after a few questions. Sara Nizamani. Go ahead, Sara.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, my name is Suhir Khalik. I'm a research scholar at Applied Economics Research Center. I have something to share from my personal experience, sir. Sir, I have talked about coming from small-scale farming family on this platform before. Once my family applied for an agriculture loan in the central bank, sir, and as per the rule, the employees of the bank visited the farm. Those who aren't from agriculture here know that when rice is harvested, each grain of rice has natural covering on it, an envelope on it. Sir, you will not believe what the bank staff said to my father. They said, "Ijaz साहब, आपने तो कमाल कर दिया, आपने हर चावल के दाने पर कवर चढ़ा दिया." Sir, I mean, this is the knowledge of our policy makers, sir. And then, sir, Google did a research in country where they were astonished to find that in our country, from housewives to mega businessmen, all saved through committees. In fact, sir, in one of the case, it was found that businessmen were investing rupees 15 million a month. So, sir, how do we increase financial inclusion when our people don't obviously trust the policymakers, and we have such horrible policymakers, to be honest, sir? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Asghar Hussain Saab, last question.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Asghar Hussain. I work for Finca, Microfinance Bank. Acha, mera jo sawal tha, it was because we are discussing digital economy. So of course we all know that we have a large informal parallel economy, and of course there are reasons why they prefer to stay out of the system. So it actually turns out to be a major barrier to promote digital economy. So how do you propose we address that challenge?
Okay, let me go back to the panel, but I'll just add one question to this list. Can you please, folks, tell me who does research on the digital economy? Who informs us on the digital economy? And if no one, who should? Should there be someone, or am I wrong? There should be no one who should be looking at the digital economy and researching it. Because in each of my webinars, I've discussed a lot of areas. I've found that nobody seems to know anything about the economy or research anything about the economy. So over to you folks. Fareed Saab, would you like to go first?
Gee, thank you, Nadeem. So I'll just take the first question with respect to data security aspect. And I mean, I can assure the lady that, when your money is moving around the world, whether it's in Pakistan or in Europe or US, it's tracked by all agencies, by all central banks. So security, if you're talking about in terms of secrecy, in terms of moving money around, I mean, that's not available anywhere. But if you mean by secrecy that your personal data is protected to the extent that it's only seen by the people who are supposed to see it. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, we do not have such laws, data protection laws. There are companies abroad who are actually specializing in providing services, but up until now in Pakistan, the laws are still governed by the central bank's directives about data protection and customer secrecy. And banks try their level best to comply with it, but obviously the level of security that's available to perhaps larger banks or in other jurisdictions is not available here. One thing which central bank has done in Pakistan is that it has disallowed using any cloud or web-based services to post customer data, which is a stifling growth in Pakistan, because that means that we cannot use any offshore service which uses cloud-based computing to store our customer data. Central bank believes that this is important for data secrecy, but globally the opinion is different. So this is, these are some of the challenges that we are facing, and we are in talks with the regulator, and hopefully with the passage of time, some of these things might change as well.
research वाले सवाल पे बता दें.
Sir, I would agree with you. I mean, we do our own kind of research. We have our own research department. We sometimes collaborate with our industry associations to do primary research. American Business Council, of which we are a member, or the Overseas Chamber of Commerce, they do some research. But I agree with you that there is no centralized agency or a think tank which does research on digital economy in Pakistan, or at least I have not seen anything that has been produced under that banner.
Zuhair Sab?
Gee, on the research front, I would tend to agree with both of you gentlemen that there is very little depth, unfortunately. We have, various investment banks publishing reports on various economic issues and so on. But I think something which is focused on the digital economy, the digital growth, is totally absent at this point in time. I have not come across anything of any value so far, unfortunately.
Okay. And anything else you want to say? Last words?
No, I think so much has been said. I mean, and as I keep saying, none of this is difficult to do. It's a question of just the will to be able to do it. And I think it's a joint effort between the government, the policymakers, and the private sector to make it happen as quickly as possible. We just need to have dialogues like this, and maybe coming out of this would be a paper which actually summarizes all of this and puts it to the right people.
We will ensure.
I think that's.
Let me ask you, while I have you here, I want to ask you another question. There is talk of assembling a cell phone in Pakistan. Are you for it or are you against it?
I think it doesn't matter, to be honest. These are things that we get hung up on, and then we waste a lot of energy and time on it. I remember in 2005, we, at that time, as part of Mobile Inc., we went to the GSM Association, which is the international body for telecom operators. And we said, Pakistan needs a sub $20 handset. Make it happen. And they looked around and they talked to people in Africa and other places, and they say, you're absolutely correct. They went to the then Nokia, Motorola, Siemens, and so on, and said, how soon can you produce a below $20 handset? It took them 6 months in the industry to produce that. That's what we'd be looking for. That's the kind of thing we should be participating in, rather than wasting time and energy on trying to do local stuff. I mean, we've done local cars for, 25, 30 years, and so what? I mean, they are as expensive as any car that you would want to import from anywhere else. And the quality isn't all that good, to be honest with you. So I would not focus on that. I would focus instead on the pricing, so that the people at the right level can get access and stop taxing everything.
I'm scared that we might be stuck into a Q mobile economy, that all of us will be forced to have a Q mobile, and we can't have anything else but a Q mobile. I don't know whether it's going to be good for us or not.
That would be a terrible decision. But that's one of the, as I said, these are unfortunately, short-term, a little bit myopic decisions, which we shouldn't be taking.
Sir, what would you say? Should we be stuck in a Q-mobile economy? Should we be stuck in an economy?
No, I don't believe in any protection being given to any domestic producer in any area. I think protection is very damaging to the industry and ultimately damaging to the economy. But Dr. Haq, I would not be as pessimistic as you are. I think the basic enabling technologies are available in Pakistan. Their cost is going down despite the heavy taxation on them. The ability of people to use them, the demand for its use. I think the way that e-commerce has ballooned in the last 4 months, the kind of retailers who you wouldn't have ever thought would even think of e-commerce, they are using it. There are, of course, huge challenges. E-commerce is not just about taking an order or on a website. E-commerce is primarily about the whole fulfillment. And that's the most complex part of it, knowing what you can sell and whether it is there or not, and then delivering it. So, a lot of this has to change. The government has some role in this. They've got to allow the regulatory capability, or they've got to allow people to be able to do it and not inhibit it. That is the most important thing that the government has to do. The post office could be rejuvenated in this. If they really have any sense in them, or if they have any desire to be rejuvenated, because the demand for delivery and the demand for e-commerce is going to continue to grow. E-commerce does require a payment mechanism. So whether the state bank stops it or allows it, ultimately, people are going to come up with methods of payment. The major banks can't. They can't even handle a credit card. I mean, consumer banking just doesn't exist in this country. There were 1 million credit card holders 15 years ago. There's 1 million credit card holders today. If it wasn't for the Benazir Income Support Program, there would be no debit cards either. That has ballooned because of that requirement. So the banks have failed. Somebody else has to come in and fill that gap. And the regulatory framework has to allow that. So I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic primarily because the technology is here, the skills are here, and the need of people. As Suhir Khalik said, 150 million telephone users, of which I'm told 90 million are internet enabled. It's not going to go away. They are going to use it.
Thank you. Azaz, I share your optimism. But let me also point out, I know this conversation should end because we're running out of time, but it's very interesting. So I must raise this with you before we go. I think it was maybe 5 or 7 years ago, a long time ago, when you told me that you were thinking of working with the telecoms because they've got a huge receivable, inventory to be able to monetize, securitize that and work with that electronically. Now, it's 5 or 7 years ago, it still has not happened. Telecoms, as Suhir is here too, he can comment on it too, they're sitting on a huge pile of cash and a flow. And somehow nothing is done with it. It's just sitting there idle. Can you please explain that? I mean, I share your optimism, but is this reason for optimism that this remains a problem for the last 7 years since you talked about it?
No, it's not a problem. It's something that we haven't been able to address so far. I mean, as Suhir Khalik said, that there is billions of rupees lying in that fund, which was meant to be spent on giving better service, and it hasn't been spent on that. So that could not. But forget that. There's people willing to invest more because there is so much to be gained by that investment. We've invested. We have a subsidiary which has a product which is being used by about 40,000 retailers, the small khokawalas, and effectively used by them. We are hoping with the state bank license, we will be able to connect them with banks also. We are hoping that it will become a method of getting credit to these khokawalas and cheaper credit. But it's an ongoing process. Taken us 5 years to get to this. Take us another 5 years. I'm sure we'll do better.
So what's the hitch?
There's no hitch. It's just a slow process. This is evolutionary.
Is
There
it
is no
the government?
eureka moment, unfortunately, Dr. Haq. You can't say that I've today arrived in a new digital Pakistan. It's not going to happen.
Zuhair Saab, what's your take on this?
So as I've said before, like as Asad was saying, there's nothing stopping this. It's the will of the policymakers to.
So it's a policy. It's a policy. Yeah.
A lot of it is policy. Look, I mean, again, when we talk about not rolling out to rural areas, I pointed that out already to you. You know, there's so many different issues right there. Somebody has to step back, and something, by the way, that the Telecom Task Force actually recommended. It was almost a year ago now, September last year, that what we probably need is a very senior level Chief Digital Officer's office in the Prime Minister's office, where, I know we're not talking, I'm sorry, with due respect, we're not talking bureaucrats here. We're talking technocrats, as an office staffed by those kind of people who get what is happening out there in the world and can actually make it happen. And that the office to be given the, you know, the authority and the leeway to pull all of this together, as we've discussed today over the last you know, hour and a bit, and make it happen. So it's, as I said, I keep saying, there's nothing difficult here. There's no rocket science here. It can be done very, very quickly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, folks. Thank you, Azaz. Thank you, Zuhair. Thank you, Farizab. Thank you very much, all of you. It has been a wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed it. But let me just say, we've talked about pharma yesterday or day before, and pharma has the same problem. They're giving 1% of their sales to the government. Government does nothing. We talk to the exporters. It's the same problem. They give 1% of their sales. Nothing happens. And this money is supposed to go into research, development of the sector. It doesn't happen. On cotton, it's the same story. On everything, it's the same story. The elephant in the room is our governance system, which is a colonial system, which still hangs in the 19th century. So while I share Azaz's optimism, I know he's always been optimistic, and I share his optimism, but the colonial setup worries me, and it makes me wonder whether we'll produce a Suzuki or a Q-Mobile or an Apple. And I think the jury is still out, so let's wait for it to happen. But I don't know whether this could happen in my lifetime or not. So with those thoughts, thank you, folks. Really enjoyed it. Inshallah, we'll do it again soon. This is going to be a continuing conversation. Thank you all. Bye-bye.